Highbridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents They Don't Need to Understand, Stories of Hope, Fear, Family, Life, and Never Giving In, by Andy Biersack with Ryan J. Downey. Read by Andy Biersack. Introduction. Playing hard rock music in the past decade is a bit like going into an Apple store and trying to sell someone a flip phone. I know that I've been very fortunate to make rock records and tour the world in Black Veil Brides and with my solo vehicle, Andy Black. The joke at the center of the Broadway musical Rock of Ages is the very idea of this music being a thing. Hard rock, heavy metal, and punk rock are often considered antiquated, which honestly makes it sort of more rebellious than ever to try to become a rock singer. Like many people who end up in the creative arts somewhere, I was a bit of a loner. I built a version of myself from all the things I feared when I was a child and presented it to the world as an adult. I'm a high school dropout and made the most of my friends online. I co-founded Black Veil Brides in my hometown and told everyone that I would move to California when I turned 18. When the day arrived, nobody in the band came with me. It didn't matter. I moved from Cincinnati, Ohio to Hollywood and lived in the back of my '98 Cadillac Eldorado because I wouldn't allow myself any other options. I had to make it. There's a certain measure of being insufferable that's necessary for a story like mine. I'm an only child. I'd make my parents turn on the camcorder and read interview questions I'd prepared for myself. "Why, yes, Mom," I'd say as a precocious 6-year-old. "I am the biggest rock star in the world right now. Thank you so much for asking me about that." I was determined to do something that, at least in the traditional sense, is essentially a non-job. Work that includes prancing around on stage in tight pants and eye makeup for a living. I wanted to tell stories of pageantry and art and to sing anthems for outcasts, idealists, and iconoclasts. It didn't matter that most people couldn't understand. I put this book together with my good friend Ryan J. Downey, who has interviewed me via different mediums in various settings throughout my career. I'm sober now, which certainly helped as we rummaged through my memories on multiple occasions over lunch, dinner, or coffee, carving out afternoons and evenings between albums and tours. It's sometimes hard to differentiate between what you remember happening as a very young kid and what you remember simply because an adult told you about it later. I have a vivid picture of myself, as a baby, traveling with my mom when she was a makeup artist for Elizabeth Arden. The skills my mom developed were of great use to me when I became interested in makeup as a teenager. I don't remember that at all. But when those stories come up, I can paint a picture of exactly what that looked like and felt like to experience. The images we portray for ourselves probably inform a lot more of our decisions than we realize, particularly among creative people who are already good at painting pictures. I knew that I wanted to create art and perform in a way that connected with people ever since I was a kid building tiny concerts in my bedroom with Kiss action figures. The fact that I get to do precisely that as an adult makes me incredibly lucky. I'm not here to complain about how hard I had to work or proclaim what a martyr I am for living in my car and playing in basements and art galleries to make it. I'd instead celebrate playing O2 Academy Brixton in London, surrounded by pyrotechnics, confetti, and 5,000 fans. My hope is there's something instructive in the work ethic it took to get here. For the better part of the last 10 years, I never sat down to think about whether or not I was enjoying myself. It was more about the constant push forward to prove to all the naysayers, real or perceived, that I was going to succeed and that I was going to do something great. As I've gained more perspective, it sometimes makes me laugh to remember how much of my adolescence and early adulthood was driven by revenge. I wanted vengeance against all of the people who didn't understand. I'm not interested in telling a bunch of rock guy stories about how hard we partied. Even the stuff I engaged in that could be considered rock and roll debauchery was less about who I was and more about falling into the role of someone I felt like I was supposed to be. I've come full circle. I'm back to my core, authentic self. More than ever, I'm the same kid now as when I started, in so many ways. There were diversions from the path along the way, and yet here I am, back how I began. I was barely 18 years old the first time I went on tour. I was a high school dropout who moved to Hollywood to chase my rock and roll dreams. But the truth is that at that age, I had no idea who I was as a person. I knew what I wanted to be, or at least the image I wanted to project, but I quickly found myself in a new world, a shifting reality, without the experience or wherewithal to navigate all the challenges of life on the road. I tried to replicate the behavior of my rock and roll heroes I'd read about in an attempt to fit in with the older people around me. In 2020, as we arrived at the anniversary of our first album, We Stitch These Wounds, and the release of the reimagined version restitched these wounds. I found myself looking back at the earliest days of Black Veil Brides. I would tell people I was 19 in hopes they'd take me more seriously. I'd pretend to listen to cool and important bands because I was terrified of being treated like I wasn't cool. I remember times I was rude or inconsiderate because I thought it made me seem more interesting or badass. It takes time to find our way. It was a journey to become the person I'd started out dreaming I'd become. I never aspired to become a 20-year-old jerk still shaking off the hangover from the night before, but as the influences around me grew stronger, that's where I quickly ended up. A character replaced my true self. There are so many odds against an awkward kid from the Midwest becoming an internationally known performer. I never take it for granted that the fans are the reason I have that. I'm fortunate to have the love and adoration of even one person in a world where so many, from all walks of life, struggle to feel loved by anyone at all. The ultimate goal was to create something grand, a legacy. I've never been ashamed to say that I want success, even when the definition of success changes. There's a stigma attached to doing too much. I've been willing to do everything that's in front of me, whatever it takes, to achieve my goals. This book isn't a memoir, necessarily. I'm too young for that. I just want to explain as much as I can about how this happened, in hopes that someone hearing it will be able to draw inspiration from my story and feel encouraged to continue to build their own. I'm also writing this to say thank you. Thank you for 10 years of opportunities. Thank you for allowing me to evolve into a better person. Thanks for growing up with me, for singing with me, and for inspiring me. Because of you, I get the chance to do this all over again. Now, when I go on stage to perform these songs, both old and new, I'm not doing it from behind some rock star mask. I'm doing it as an adult, a sober, married, comic book sports nerd. And while that may not be the way all of my rock star heroes were perceived, it turns out it is who I was meant to be. To me, that is my rock and roll dream come true. Chapter 1. Gold and Gods. It should have been a moment of triumph, but the crowd booed us with visceral contempt. They hated Black Veil Brides. The year before, in the same building, we were honored with a public seal of approval from a living legend, a man in black that had blazed a trail for every band like mine. I'm Alice Cooper, and I'm here to introduce the next performers that will grace the Golden Gods stage tonight. The pioneering shock rocker smiled widely at the fans filling the LA Live Theater and everyone streaming the 2012 award show at home. Our makeup made him as proud as our multiple nominations, he said. Rock and roll right now is anemic, he pointed out. Look at some of the bands out there. I keep telling them, you guys should just listen to Black Veil Brides. The very next year, we were back at the Revolver Golden Gods Awards, a celebration of hard rock and heavy metal in downtown Los Angeles, listening to an introduction from another icon whose music we'd loved as kids. Sebastian Bach announced we had won Song of the Year, making us the first band to earn a Golden God 3 times in a row. Jake Pitts and Jinx shared the Best Guitarist in 2012. We were Best New Band in 2011. All my rock and roll dreams, my improbable but persistent plans, led to landmark accomplishments like this one. I was once a small boy in Cincinnati staging elaborate imaginary concerts in my bedroom. An isolated teen, with lip rings and a modest MySpace following, and then an 18-year-old wannabe in Hollywood surviving on 7-Eleven pizza. My face went from a sloppily screen-printed image on a t-shirt to the covers of magazines. In an industry ravaged by change and dismissive of loud guitars and louder haircuts, we'd landed a major label deal and earned a devoted following. Something about Black Veil Brides connected with other outcasts like me, just as I had always hoped it would. The song that gave us the three-peat milestone at the Golden Gods was In the End, an anthem written in tribute to my late grandfather. He was a World War II veteran who always believed in me, whether I was drawing pictures of Batman or singing along to the Phantom of the Opera. I could barely wait to tell the world that this one was for him. The 2013 Golden Gods Award should have been a victory lap. It was not. As we heard the famous voice of Skid Row say, "Black Veil Brides," we made our way from behind the stage props and took our place in front of the cameras. When Sebastian spoke our name, the reaction was immediate, and it was not congratulatory. The venue swelled with an incredulous cacophony of negativity, a pissed-off chorus of spite. Our band sure inspired that crowd. We united them in their hatred of us. The year before, we'd done a song with Dee Snider of Twisted Sister, whose big hit was We're Not Gonna Take It. Just like Dee or Sebastian or any of my heroes before me, I wasn't going to take it either. I came out on stage grabbing my crotch and waving my middle finger right back at the angry faces who stared at me. Some people spat at us. Fans who watch the show at home may think the tables out there were full of rock stars and industry types, but in reality, the floor was filled with ticket buyers who were there to see this year's headlining act, and that's about it. It's hard enough for any band who isn't Guns N' Roses or Metallica, but this crowd despised us. They were outraged. The rest of the guys made their way to the microphone to claim our prize. I prowled the stage instead. I locked eyes with specific people in the audience. Anyone who seemed particularly antagonistic towards us. I wanted my resistance, my defiance to be clear. We had always been a polarizing band, given how divisive we were, because of our image, our music, our personalities, and every other reason people chose. We felt honor-bound to champion the true believers that long supported us with passionate strength. After all, the Golden Gods Awards were chosen by the fans, the ones voting online. I grabbed the microphone. It was my turn to speak. "Here's the thing," I bellowed in my best professional wrestler voice. WWE star Chris Jericho, who hosted, later complimented my heel turn. "You motherfuckers should have voted for somebody else, because Black Veil Brides won 3 years in a row. Let me say one thing," I continued as I pointed at one particularly hateful guy. "I know that you, fat motherfucker, and you right there." I looked at another guy. "You hate us." I hoisted our new trophy in the air. "I'm holding a heavy as shit award, so fuck with me right now, motherfuckers." The booing became even louder. I wasn't finished yet. "Here's the thing." I must have been going for a three-peat with thing, too. "Black Veil Brides have a song on the radio." I glared at someone. "You have a fat fucking ass. I don't care what any of you fat, bearded motherfuckers say. Black Veil Brides won Best Song of the Year." Even in the midst of all the hatred coming at me, and the piss and vinegar I spat right back, I didn't forget whom I most needed to salute. My grandfather. "This one goes out to Urban Flanders." That acceptance speech, if we can call it that, became something of a YouTube legend in certain circles. Honestly, that's fine with me. I haven't backed down from what I said. I won't ever apologize for speaking my mind, for defending myself, or for protecting my band. We should all respect ourselves enough to stand proudly. I did, however, take to Twitter to accept responsibility for hurting anyone who struggles with body image issues related to weight. Please understand that in that moment on stage, my dam had broken. I looked at all those angry faces and saw everyone who had ever ridiculed the music I liked, mocked the way I dressed, teased me about my speaking voice, or told me my dreams were impossible. I saw the scene kids back home who targeted me on message boards, the commenters who bashed Knives and Pens and its earnest anti-bullying message. My quest for revenge against my enemies, real and imagined, wasn't over. As much as I'd accomplished, I still felt like that Catholic school reject raging against the world. Chapter 2. Kiss and Make Up. I was born in December 1990, but I can tell you everything about the 1988 Bengals. I'm likewise schooled in 1989's Hot in the Shade, the 15th studio album by Kiss. When I was around 7 years old, shopping for CDs with my parents at the now-defunct big-box retailer Media Play, I wondered why new music didn't seem to have the same longevity as the bands my father grew up loving. Everything contemporary felt disposable and impermanent. The early to mid-90s were filled with one-hit wonders like Crash Test Dummies, Tonic, Marcy Playground, and so many momentary hitmakers. I gravitated more towards music from previous generations. It was the same with sports. The Cincinnati Bengals used to go to the Super Bowl regularly. The Cincinnati Reds won the World Series the year I was born. The interest I had in teams I grew up cheering for was predicated on past success. So, on the most basic level, the two things that I enjoyed the most in my adolescence, music and sports, were steeped in nostalgia. I dealt entirely in nostalgia for things I couldn't have experienced. But I knew all of the facts, and I could put myself in the position of remembering it or even thinking that I had been there in some capacity. Nearly every memory I have, the genuinely vivid ones, involves performing in some way. The thing I liked about sports as a kid was that it was an opportunity for people to watch me. That was the one thing that drew me to the goalie position. There's only one of you. Of course, the main thing I loved about the position was getting to wear that badass mask. I wanted to be the world's first rock star professional hockey player, actor, comedian, multi-hyphenate. I painted vivid mental pictures of myself in those roles. From the moment I knew I wanted to be in a band, I wanted to be the front man. It's hard for me to understand what makes someone choose to be a guitar player or a drummer instead of a singer. Don't get me wrong. I love all the instrumentation in rock music, and I have tremendous respect for the patience, practice, talent, and ability required to learn an instrument. I get the appeal of playing drums or guitar, but when forming a band, I wanted to be the vocalist. Plus, I knew as a lyricist I could convey a message. I would ask my mom, why would anyone want any other job? When I was 3 or 4, I wore these Fisher-Price roller skates and insisted that my parents introduce me before I entered the room. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Little Johnny Rickfield. I liked the name Johnny, and I had heard the name Rick Springfield on the radio. I added little because I was small. Little Johnny Rickfield. My mom tells me that my interest in musical theater developed via Disney cartoons like The Lion King and her Barbra Streisand VHS tape. When I was around 5, I saw something about the Phantom of the Opera on television and felt immediately drawn to it. I became obsessed for a long time. I had my tonsils out when I was 7, and to cheer me up, my aunt brought me a book about the Phantom of the Opera to the hospital. I loved that book. Michael Crawford had the coolest role. He got to wear the makeup, the mask, the cape. The lyrics conveyed the story's themes. I wanted that. The quest was always to find a stage to perform on. If the museum center is having a Christmas pageant and 4 kids are going to get to dance with a snowman, I'd better be one of those kids. When my elementary school had a talent show, I sang Music of the Night from Phantom, wearing the mask and cape, of course. I loved the theatricality of comic book superheroes. My dad introduced me to Batman with the 60s TV series that starred the late Adam West as the Caped Crusader. I walked my neighborhood dressed as Batman, even when it wasn't Halloween. My love of Gotham City's vigilante detective led to my first musical fandom, Kiss. My dad kept a set of Kiss trading cards from the 70s in the basement. Those cards were my introduction to the band. I remember wondering, is this Batman? Nope. It was Gene Simmons, a.k.a. The Demon, bassist and co-vocalist of Kiss. My dad is a big fan of sports, music, and comics, but I don't know that he was ever as big of a fan of Kiss as I became. Except for the Green Bay Packers, he's originally from Wisconsin, baseball, and a few other sports-related things, including soccer, which I never got into as much. That's probably the case with most everything I discovered through him. His hints at superfandom became my obsessions. It would be difficult for anyone to match the affinity I had for the things I loved. I wasn't interested in socializing with other kids. I didn't have a brother or sister, but I had VHS tapes where Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley taught me about adulthood. They put together well-structured sentences and utilized the English language in a way that encouraged me to become more intelligent. I wanted to sound like them when I spoke. I also wanted the makeup, the huge crazy hair, and the loud guitars. The first album I ever bought was Revenge, with some cash my grandfather had given me for helping him blacktop his backyard. Revenge was their first studio album with drummer Eric Singer, who'd replaced the late Eric Carr, himself the replacement of Peter Criss, a.k.a. the Cat Man. It was a great time to discover Kiss because by 1996, the original lineup was back together, in makeup, on the Alive Worldwide tour. I had the Kiss action figures made by McFarlane Toys, the company started by artist, Spawn creator, and Image Comics co-founder Todd McFarlane. His Kiss figures were the successor to the classic Dolls, first made in the late 70s. The elaborate miniaturized Kiss stage sets I built in my room to put on make-believe concerts included working lights I had cobbled together from our Christmas decorations. In terms of how I would conduct myself as a musician both on stage and in conversation with fans and the press, no one was more important for me than the star child Paul Stanley. I wanted to be like Gene Simmons on stage and Paul Stanley off stage. It wasn't his makeup, his songs, or his stage presence. His live persona can be a bit silly. I have more of an affinity for it now, and I've always respected how he commands attention. There's even a viral bootleg collection called People, Let Me Get This Off My Chest, which compiles a bunch of his stage banter. I certainly give him credit for creating something memorable up there, but it wasn't my favorite thing about him. What I liked most about the Kiss vocalist and guitarist is the way he carried himself in interviews. I never really identified with the womanizing or tough-talking know-it-all attitude of Gene. I was drawn to the way Paul spoke. I loved his intelligence, his fearlessness when called upon to defend his band, and his self-deprecating humor. Musically, Kiss taught me how important it is to give an audience a reason to sing along. Kiss is why I later got into the Misfits and AFI. A song like Knives and Pens is representative of the lessons I've learned about structure and hooks. Whether the crowd identifies with my lyrics or not, the chorus is an invitation to participate. My personality was very much shaped by Paul, and to some extent Gene as well. Take, for example, the parlor trick with the vocabulary I've long employed. I don't mean to say that I'm this disingenuous guy who's trying to fool everybody. Still, I've come to realize that my interest in collecting words and drawing from a deep well of language when speaking all traces back to listening to Gene and Paul on those VHS tapes. Context is everything, and I happen to catch them at a unique point in their career. Gene and Paul were just old enough to be reflective about their past, yet still young enough to be upset about the bleak look of the future for rock and roll. The early 90s were a long way from their 70s heyday and their multi-platinum 80s. New Kiss albums weren't selling as they had before, and their concerts weren't well attended. It's worth pointing out that Kiss always watched the trends with acute business savvy. During the 80s, the band was sort of Paul Stanley's solo project. They locked into the hair metal thing that was happening on radio and MTV and revived the brand after the changing lineups of the makeup years had taken their toll on Kiss commercially. Ask 10 fans about the sound of Kiss, and there may be 10 different answers, depending on which era of the group served as an individual's entry point to the band. The most considerable portion of their fan base will swear that Kiss's sound is this particular 70s vibe, but I would argue that that sonic style was as much borrowed as any other. There are plenty of things about their early songs that were derivative. Bands like Sweet and Slade undoubtedly influenced Kiss in the old days. Even a lot of the ideas they get credit for weren't necessarily original, which I know frustrates some people. No point in denying that both Alice Cooper and the New York Dolls arrived before Kiss. I've never criticized them for it. For me, it was beautiful. Because here was this one band that represented all these different eras all by themselves. Want their Bon Jovi record? Hide Your Heart on Hot in the Shade is practically a rewrite of Livin' on a Prayer, replacing the story of Tommy and Gina with one about Johnny and Rosa. Want their Alice in Chains record? There's Carnival of Souls, The Final Sessions, which I believe has the band's best lyrics. As a 6-year-old, I would sit in my bedroom and cry listening to Gene sing about the death of a friend in Childhood's End. There's that big commercial crossover, I Was Made for Lovin' You, a massive hit in the days of disco. They've worked hard to stay relevant for close to 50 years now and succeeded. How is that a bad thing? There's a reason why they've been so successful for so long. My interest in sports played into my love of Kiss as well. Fans will look back fondly on a particular period of their favorite team. I don't see it as any different with Kiss. By the time I was born, original guitarist Ace Frehley, the Spaceman, had already been succeeded by Vinnie Vincent, both in and then out of makeup, the late Mark St. John, and Bruce Kulick, who was in Kiss for over a decade. Carr, the Fox, was the drummer through the 80s. Sure, I may have liked to see this or that running back from before I was born on the field, but this player we have now is my running back, my era. My views on Kiss are different from other bands. I don't have the attitude that everyone is replaceable in every group. I'm just saying that for my first love in music, and for that matter, pop culture, I saw the member changes the same way that I saw anything else. Gene and Paul made ridiculous statements about what Kiss was and what they would achieve throughout the 70s. But the duo I encountered on my television via these VHS tapes were in this unique period. They were no longer as over the top with their pronouncements. By the 90s, the world had beaten them down enough to where they were a bit more realistic, though, of course, still not without some hubris. That's where my persona developed. I wonder about the chicken or the egg scenario. Did I fall in love with Kiss because I'm this old soul? Or did they inform the world that I saw at that age more than I ever realized? Do I often come off like an older, more jaded person because of their influence? Or was there always that jadedness inside of me that responded to them? It certainly affected a lot of my life. Those were the most formative stages when it came to my areas of interest and what I wound up doing professionally as an adult. When I consider what I'm doing today and what I imagined I'd be doing with my life because of those Kiss VHS tapes, I'd be kind of a fool to not give credit to where that came from for me. Kiss didn't really get into the whole Tony Robbins-style self-help vibe until that era, which for whatever reason, and whether it was genuine or not, worked perfectly for me. It instilled a drive in me for self-preservation, self-excitement, and self-discovery. I had that when I was 6 years old, well before most kids are teased. A 6-year-old may feel ignored or made fun of a little bit, But it's really not until a kid gets older that people like me start to suffer the perpetual hell of being the weird person somewhere. The hell that they had received from critics throughout their career shaped the attitude projected by Kiss. It's not for me to evaluate their entire rationale behind it, but I suspect it was a way of giving those affirmations to themselves as much as to their fans. Whatever the motives were, it worked. It was crucial to me. The simple ideas that I liked cool things, that the things that made me who I am are valid, and that it doesn't matter if other people don't like or don't understand what I enjoy or who I am. Chapter 3. Amy and Chris. I don't subscribe to the theory that a person has to be special or gifted to be able to do what I do for a living. I'm not some otherworldly being that was dropped from the sky to rock planet Earth. Like Gene and Paul, I believe in dedication, hard work, and drive. I started planning everything I'm doing when I was 8. None of this was by accident. I had to wait to be old enough to do most of this stuff, but I already had the plan. Some people figure they don't have to get their lives together till they're 30. I always think, why weren't you getting your life together a long time ago? When I was a guest on Kevin Smith's Fat Man on Batman podcast in early 2018, the Clerks and Mallrats filmmaker delivered a massive compliment. You are incredibly well-heeled. You're a credit to your parents, he said. That's something I remember in my childhood. I'd hear and be like, what does that mean? As an adult and a parent, whenever I meet somebody like you, I'm like, man, somebody raised you right. I told him that my parents are my best friends, and that they always have been. Did you say they were your best friends? His eyes widened. He said he might cry. My mom and dad must own more Black Veil Brides and Andy Black merch than anyone else. They were at all of the shows in the early days, and they still come when they can. My parents never made me feel like I couldn't accomplish something simply because I was just a kid. For as long as I can remember, both of them spoke to me like I was an adult. I'm not passing judgment on other child-rearing styles, but I often encounter people who must have been taught early on that they weren't capable of success. As a middle-class family in southern Ohio, we didn't have a lot of money when I was growing up, but I wasn't interested in expensive things anyway. I couldn't afford to have the latest Air Jordans. I wanted Kiss action figures, acrylic paint pens, and hockey pads. As a teenager, I wanted blank t-shirts to paint all over before I wore them. My mom, Amy, taught me the value of kindness over wealth. I see it in her everyday interactions with people. In her work, she helps sick kids and their families. I talk to her every day. We have a real closeness intellectually and emotionally. I credit her with my comedic sensibilities, too. We laugh at the same things. When I was little, my mom was a manager at a family-owned restaurant chain. After the location closed, she went to work at Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center, where she was the manager of a hospital coffee shop called the Rainbow Room. The hospital recognized her skill set was much broader than food service and moved her over to the Volunteer Services Department. She now heads a major department at the Children's Hospital. During her time there, she earned a degree online. Her life is entirely different now than it was when I was a kid, and I find that incredible. She had clearly defined values, a plan for where she saw herself, and she did the work to arrive there. Most days I wouldn't see my mom again after she dropped me off at school till the late evening when she'd get home from the diner. If I were already in bed, she'd come in and kiss my forehead. She often smelled like French fries. To this day, the familiar scent of fries on clothing soothes me the way a perfume might comfort someone else. I spent most of my time with my father, Chris. Black Veil Brides fans are well acquainted with him via his very active social media presence, always in support of my endeavors. In the early 80s, long before I was born, my dad sang in local bands. One of them became a regional touring outfit. They even opened for the original Glenn Danzig-led incarnation of the Misfits at the world-famous rock, punk, and hardcore club, CBGB, in Manhattan's East Village. They supported Social Distortion at one point, too. After his last band broke up, my dad did the responsible thing, which was to make use of his education and earn enough to provide for our family. He had a couple of degrees already and went back to get his master's in human resource development in 1994. He's worked in labor relations for the local government for most of his professional life. I liked hanging out with my dad. My social interaction was kind of covered. I didn't feel like I needed friends. My parents weren't very social and didn't hang out with a lot of people. I can probably count on one hand the number of close friends my dad had when I was a kid. He tired of people quickly and had a habit of short-lived friendships. I would never have had the opportunities I've had were it not for my dad's relentless and tireless drive to ensure I could have anything I wanted from life. I can only imagine there was significant pressure on my parents financially, but that was never exhibited to me. While they spoke to me like I was an adult, they never burdened me with the grown-up.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?